Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode. And I've got the awesome Tomo Littlewood. His real name is Keith. He lives in Dubai, 3 kids. You know, he's been wanting to kill them because he's had 4 months off of homeschooling. I do feel for all the parents out there. I obviously don't have any kids, just Craig and Craig and Winston. But today I just wanted to, we wanted to talk about menopause and menopausal issues and those terrible night sweats and the weight gain and the insomnia and all the horrible things that women go through when they hit menopause or perimenopause. And, we get a lot of women in our program that have these issues. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine and saying that my mum, her sister died about 10 years ago. And at the time she was going through menopause, and my mum's diet isn't very good, and she drinks a lot of booze, and she had the insomnia, and she actually ended up going into a mental institution because she wasn't sleeping. And obviously then the stress of her sister's death. And, I look back now and I think, oh my God, knowing what I know now, I wish I knew that back then because I probably could have helped her more. And it just watching her go through that menopause, she didn't have to go through that. And I think if you're a woman and you're watching this and, you're getting any of those menopausal symptoms or perimenopausal symptoms, it's not normal, and don't let the doctors tell you that it's normal and you should just expect it and you need to go on HRT, because you should just go through menopause, hey, Keith, and not get night sweats and insomnia and heaps of weight gain. It should just happen, right?
Well, I mean, you talk about those kind of symptoms, but I can see those symptoms in young 20 and 30-year-old clients sometimes. And that's really a kind of a product of ongoing stressors rather than particularly at the menopause. But the fact that they're very, very similar could lend itself to the aspects of stress physiology. And I certainly think most of those things like the hot flashes, insomnia, and even kind of increases in estrogen can generally be mediated or lost or suppressed or kind of not experienced when there are adequate compounds, minerals, vitamins in the diet that can offset those. I certainly think that the misconception that estrogen is lost at menopause seems still to be one of the most.
Why is that, do you think? Because we get a lot of women come in and go, oh yeah, but Kitty, I've been to the doctor and they're saying that my estrogen's really low and that I need to take estrogen and that's going to fix it. Why is that, do you think?
Well, it's the common theme. I think it comes from the misinformation and also integration with the studies of HRT, because HRT, the premise was that over a decade, let's say over the last 50, 60 years, it was always assumed that estrogen was the cardioprotective factor, that because women tended to live longer than men. Well, you could argue that a couple of is that it typically in modern westernized cultures, and I don't mean to get shot here by women for saying this, but perhaps when a lot of guys were doing out more physical work, longer days, stress is involved in more pollutants and stuff, and the typical role of females at home, not saying the work was any less hard, but perhaps the stresses that the man was experiencing from a pollutant load, working down the coal mines, working other factors, many other things that suggested that guys tended to die much earlier. And one of the things that was also banded around is because women have much more estrogen than men, ergo that must be the cardioprotective compound. So there are many things that might be driving why women were living potentially longer than men. And so with that, lots of studies and money was spent on looking at the replacement of estrogen. Nobody was really thinking about what happened to progesterone. And remember that progesterone, there are a lot of misconceptions around progesterone. Now, it shouldn't come as any surprise that when a woman is able to get pregnant and maintain that pregnancy, that a large part of that is from having enough thyroid available and enough progesterone available. There's a reason why it's called progesterone, because it's progestational. It supports a healthy fetus, enough oxygen getting via the placenta, and all of the other organizational aspects that progesterone does. Estrogen is an essential hormone. We do need it. But one of the primary reasons during pregnancy why women tend to miscarry is because of high estrogen levels in that first trimester.
Mm.
So unfortunately, the focus was placed upon estrogen without looking as much at progesterone. Now, let's assume that as you approach menopause, that your ovaries are starting to decline in function. Why is it just looking at the aspects of what estrogen does rather than the other hormones that are produced in the ovaries as well, which also can produce DHEA, can produce aspects of small amounts of testosterone as well, and it can produce progesterone, which is this very, very protective hormone. Now, bearing in mind that during the menstrual cycle, the follicular phase, estrogen is ever increasing. Now, progesterone's primary role is bubbling under the surface and making sure that estrogen doesn't do too much. And one of the kind of checks and balances it has in the luteal phase, and then when the corpus luteum is being produced, is that progesterone inhibits the effects of estrogen, which is basically building more tissue, getting the uterus ready. And if that goes unchecked, that's why estrogen becomes a problem. We see the things like endometriosis, polycystic ovaries, which we talked about before. So understanding that the loss of progesterone can have such a significant effect on a female's physiology tends to be lost because there's been so much research done on the role of synthetic estrogens, and primarily from HRT. Now, there's hundreds of millions and perhaps billions of dollars of industry, pharmaceutical industry work done on promoting this pro-estrogen effect and why women should be taking it at the onset of menopause. Yet one of the real big misunderstandings is that estrogen is often not low at menopause. If you have any amount of adipose tissue on you, you are able to produce estrogen by converting other hormones like testosterone via aromatase. So if you're looking at just someone's blood test, for example, one, you may find that, and some studies have shown just from a blood test, that estrogen is not low. Some other studies have shown it is low, but if you're looking at estrogen just from a blood perspective or biochemistry perspective, this can be problematic because it doesn't always show up in the blood. Estrogen is well known to sink in tissues. We have other structures in the brain, like the pituitary, which is very responsive to estrogen. So if you look at something like prolactin, now prolactin is that hormone that you tend to produce when women are lactating and producing milk for their babies. But it's one of those hormones that's really easily promoted by estrogen. So when you do start to produce prolactin, it's usually estrogen that's stimulating the pituitary as well to produce more prolactin. And when we get more environmental stress, the estrogen is really ramped up and really stimulates the pituitary, and we see more prolactin being produced. This is why prolactinomas is one of the most common pituitary tumors that tend to be found. So looking at what the pituitary is doing, looking at what prolactin is doing, is probably a really useful indicator window of what the actual levels of estrogen are as well. You can also look at the levels of aromatase being produced. You can look at other aspects like thyroid hormone as well, and available energy. So menopause will tend to show itself with this kind of loss of progesterone effect. So I don't know about you, but many females who start taking progesterone actually start sleeping really, really well. And that should lend itself to why progesterone actually enhances sleep, because it doesn't have the dysregulatory effects that estrogen does. And we know that estrogen can have some very detrimental effects to our aerobic physiology. So our aerobic physiology is typically the system that's quite complex and advanced, but uses oxygen and primarily with carbohydrates and fats. And if there are higher levels of estrogen, which can occur during menopause, the ability to use carbohydrates efficiently can be also diminished as well. So these night sweats can come from a number of sources. One is the adrenal glands trying to kick in to produce more progesterone. There might be increases of estrogen, which also increase levels of nitric oxide, which will flush the system as well and kind of give this kind of hot flush effect as well. And also if they're in a low energy state and not consuming enough carbohydrates, because middle-aged and menopausal age women can be just as prone to not eating enough during the day as our kind of younger teenage counterparts that we talked about that were more prone to PCOS. This can be a factor of why these kind of high hot flash states, insomnia, and low energy states persist.
Mm. And, now that, women are probably listening going, okay, cool. All right. So excess estrogen, high estrogen is the cause of these menopausal symptoms. So let's talk about what causes you to become estrogen dominant. I mean, a lot of the women that come to us, the dieting, the low calorie dieting, low energy. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and also another thing that tends to go hand in hand with the low energy state is high booze consumption as well.
Yes, I was going to say
And
that's a that's a
yeah,
big,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so alcohol does have this phytoestrogen effect. It's a bit like soy,
Mm,
and some people say that soy is that harmful to health. But what the long-term studies show that permanent soy consumption has this very subtle effect of increasing estrogen levels over time. So
mm,
bring that to alcohol. You keep kind of consuming your boozes like your wines and your beers and some of the other spirits. It will have a stimulatory effect that increases estrogen levels over time.
mm,
That's why, one of the symptoms of high estrogen are these kind of puffy, water retentive states,
mm,
edemas like states that increase the amount of water that's held within the cells. And that's why I think estrogen was previously promoted as good for skin, because what it actually did was absorb loads of water into that and made you look slightly more plumper and radiant. But it was part of that accumulation of water in tissues. But if we bring it back to the diet, is that if you are in a low energy state, for example, or you're going through these Weight Watchers, very high kind of, uncooked vegetables, nuts, seeds, salads, not enough protein within the diet, not enough carbohydrates within the diet. This will lend itself to decreased detoxification of estrogen
mm,
and metabolizing of estrogen. So this state also lends itself to the suppressed state of progesterone production.
mm,
Because when you're in a low energy state, let's say one of the common things is perhaps going to train on an empty stomach in a fasted state. This
mm,
will increase the ability to produce more estrogen and suppress, say, the organizational aspects of progesterone. So
mm,
if you're in a stress state of not eating enough foods, or eating foods that suppress thyroid physiology, or eating foods that increase the amount of estrogen that you're consuming, you're in a high polluted area, you're in a low energy state, all of these things can marry up to increased estrogen levels within the system that aren't adequately taken out of the system.
mm,
Plus, they have the suppressive effects of suppressing thyroid physiology
mm,
and suppressing progesterone physiology. And also things like the cumulative effects of the unsaturated fatty acids,
mm,
which I was reading, interestingly enough, there's quite a few, lot of studies from the 80s and 90s, not so many done these days, but the unsaturated fats actually suppress the formation and production of the thyroid hormone receptor that
mm.
our thyroid hormone T3, the active form, actually binds to. So you get decreased thyroid function at the receptor level, as well as all the other kind of other effects that are related to the kind of the DNA transcription, your genomic effects, and the more energy aspects of thyroid physiology, or the non-genomic effects. So it tends to be a double whammy of low energy, environmental stimulus. I mean, and you can apply that to literally anything, whether it's kind of, low testosterone in guys. It's part of that environmental stimulus of stress, low energy states, environmental compounds that might lower that. And that just being at the menopause is just the double whammy of where you've got declining physiology of ovarian production of the steroidal hormones like progesterone, which tends to be more protective.
It's really interesting, like women come into the program and you sort of start to talk about all these things that cause excess estrogen. So like, and I used to do all of these things, and that's why I had all the issues with my menstrual cycle. But drinking, a lot of women drink too much. They're eating the low calorie, low sugar, low dairy diets. They're really stressed out. They're not eating things like liver, which is used to make their protective steroid hormones, progesterone, which opposes the estrogen. They're
Yep.
exercising excessively, which further depletes progesterone and just increases that stress in the body. The green vegetables, the nuts, the seeds. So all of these things that are suppressing thyroid function. So it's sort of like, they look at it. And I remember when I was working with Emma initially, I was like, holy shit, like every single thing that I'm doing is contributing towards you know, this excess estrogen state and the low thyroid. And it's just like all these light bulbs go off. But, you know, I mean, obviously probably not, you don't think you're drinking to be healthy, but you're thinking that you're doing cutting sugar and cutting dairy and you're doing all this healthy stuff with actually, in fact, is the opposite. And, you know, then women just end up fat and miserable and they're tired and, you know, and then I think it's just this vicious cycle of they get stuck in this, oh, I hate my body, I'm fat. All right, I'm going to jump on the next quick fix diet. They lose a bit of weight. Then they just can't, you know, stick to it anymore. Then they binge and they drink and they're just stuck in this cycle of perpetuating, you know, that's like that estrogen just gets worse and worse. And it's like, you just got to get off that yo-yo diet train, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, don't underestimate the effects of kind of consuming like kind of a glass of wine a night and then perhaps you've had a hard week and then let them rip at the weekend as, you know, because I think you talked about, you know, 2,000 calories. You can't underestimate the effect of drinking lots of booze and how much calories that can increase. So there is like a fine line of getting the calorie intake just about right. But then you know that when you start dropping substantially below those, and particularly below the 1,500 mark for some, it's just a you know, one-way train to further suppression. You know, that the energy can't function properly. You know, you can't sleep, and that's because the brain uses just as much glucose as in the waking state when it's sleeping. So, you know, getting the energy right so you can sleep right will help you to get everything right. But it's like, you know, as soon as that goes out the window and you start kind of going from pillar to post with different things, like we talked about before, you need to have some consistency with what you're doing, and that comes from understanding what are the influences that increase estrogen accumulation within tissues. How you can adequately kind of detoxify it, how you can improve, you know, the production of progesterone. And, you know, once you start to kind of get those little baby steps, you start to notice things tend to steamroll, as it were.
And let's, to finish off, talk about just a few, you know, easy things that women can do to improve their menopausal symptoms. So I think one is our beloved, well, not ours, Ray Peat's carrot salad, the old carrot salad, 2 grated carrots with coconut oil, salt and vinegar. And you sometimes like to put a bit of garlic in yours, hey?
I use that for anti-parasite. If I feel I've picked up something whilst camping or eating out at kind of dubious restaurants, I can tell quite. I've tested myself dozens of times with parasites and always found something. And I just find a raw garlic helps to get rid of any unwanted critters. Don't forget the effects of boiled mushrooms for suppressing estrogen and decreasing aromatase. I think magnesium is really, really useful because it has a pro-thyroid, also pro-function effect, particularly on how cells function as well. Decreases the excitatory nature of what estrogen can do, which is what estrogen does. It increases the excitability of cells, allows more sodium to perhaps enter the cell and makes it more excitable, and calcium as well sometimes. So I think those things are useful. I think supplemental progesterone has always worked really, really well with menopausal clients, and certainly decreased substantially any night sweats, provided they have enough energy available and sorted the sleep out. So adequate energy going in is particularly important.
Cut the booze down.
Sorry?
Cut the old booze down. I mean, I always say to women, if they've got really bad hormonal issues or I'm like, just cut it out for a period of time. It's not like you can't not drink forever, but just give your body some time, you know, without it. And I always see that anyone who does that improves a lot quicker.
Yeah, you also find that weight tends to drop reasonably well when you cut booze out. You know, you don't forget, you know, as I said, we talked about those, you kind of let rip at the weekend where you had a really stressful week. By the time you've polished off a bottle of wine, not only is the estrogen levels quite high, you're kind of, you've taken on a lot of excess calories throughout that night, where the next day your body's kind of feeling the effects of the high estrogen. Not so much the calories. There's nothing wrong with it taking on a few more calories every now and then. But if you're expecting kind of, you know, your ability to regulate estrogen and weight as being a product of what you're doing each week, having that big blowout every week, and then kind of your body taking 2 or 3 days to recover from it, you need the consistency of cutting booze out to get that effect, I think.
Oh, totally. And look, you know, like, I also find too is when you actually eat enough and balance your blood sugar. Like I don't crave alcohol anymore. Like I used to really crave it because my blood sugar was so low. And this is sort of funny but not funny, but when I used to be a real pisshead, like before I started, found Ray and Emma and all of this, and I used to just drink heaps of alcohol, I'd always try and drink on an empty stomach and then not eat, because as soon as I ate a big meal, I wouldn't really feel like drinking anymore. So
Yeah.
like, and we'd always be like, oh, eating's cheating, So I think, if you just eat a bit more, balance your blood sugar. And if you when you get home and you're feeling stressed, you're not going to, I don't think as much feel like drinking.
Yeah, the thing is, I think people will gravitate towards booze is one because it has this kind of a slightly, obviously, euphoric effect. But people with a low thyroid state will enjoy that kind of rush of carbs to the liver. But obviously, you'll end up getting the big crashes with that sometimes, and that's why eating, if you're ever drinking any alcohol, can have much, help to lessen the effects of it. But it's kind of also why people tend to gravitate towards alcohol during those kind of darker months. It's kind of a pick me up from a carb perspective and from a mood perspective. So if you are kind of someone who is having trouble with kind of high estrogen levels, and you're kind of easily prompted to reach for the glass of vino, there's a reason for why that's happening. And if you can get on top of that, it can put you in a much better state for managing estrogen levels, thyroid levels, and promoting better energy regulation.
I totally agree. So we talk about carrot, salad, mushroom, baby shoots, lowering booze, getting enough energy in, not being afraid of sugar and fruit, stop cutting sugar out of the diet. Dairy, get for the calcium is important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like you said, vitamin A is very, very useful for
liver.
Conversion to pregnenolone. Pregnenolone will give you your kind of base for all the other hormones, particularly progesterone, DHEA, estrogen where needed. So, there's not, assuming if you are ever in that state of low estrogen, which isn't impossible, it's possible that some females do have that, usually having enough pregnenolone available and vitamin A can help to remedy what's actually needed.
I think too, like it's one thing I've done really consistently since I started this is every week, every week, liver and oysters. So if you don't like liver, or you don't want to make pate, or you can't get fresh liver, take the 8 Saturée liver capsules. They're really easy, and you can, and there's probably some merit in taking the B vitamins every day, like having that regular, because obviously your body doesn't store them. It's a water soluble vitamin, not like vitamin A. So, just get that liver in however you can. Your body will thank you for it. Lower stress. Stress is a huge one. The food is key and it's the foundation. But if you just, constantly stressed with work and, external stuff, that's going to have an effect. Like we talked about the toxins, the chemicals that are around you in your house, that your skincare, things that you rub
breathing
in.
Another one. Breathing. So retention of carbon dioxide can be particularly effective just for promoting a more balanced physiology. Typically, if you're prone to hyperventilating, which some females are, it can lead to something called a respiratory alkalosis, where you've wasted all your carbon dioxide. So when that happens, you aren't able to dissociate oxygen from hemoglobin. And it's that ability to utilize oxygen that is the calming system. And that actually comes by having adequate carbon dioxide available. So whether you're doing something like a bag breathing to breathe in more carbon dioxide, or something like a Buteyko kind of calm breathing strategy of like a 5-second breath in, 5-second hold, 5-second release. This has a really good effect of just calming the nervous system down. And if you're prone to battering yourself in the gym, not doing lots of breathless exercise, doing lots of long bouts of cardio where you're constantly mouth breathing, you're often wasting a lot of carbon dioxide as well. So doing some carbon dioxide retention work can help just to calm the system down, make the metabolism work more efficiently, make your system feel calm. Because if your carbon dioxide is constantly being wasted, this ability to utilize oxygen efficiently is also diminished.
Yeah. Oh, and sun. Get sun. And vitamin D is so important as well. Try and get out every day and get some sunlight. I think a lot of people, I mean, I'm pretty lucky there's lots of sun in Dubai. What's it like in the UK?
It's always mixed. It's always mixed. I miss the UK weather. I
Do
miss
you?
winter.
Do
I miss
ya?
the rain in summer. Yeah, I miss it all. I'm actually kind of fed up of the permanent sun all year round and the heat. I think that's a
Yeah.
good sign of physiology. If I want to go to cold weather, I think
Yeah.
that's a really good sign. A lot
Well,
of
I
people
think,
want to emigrate, right, to hotter countries all the time.
well, I think though the Dubai is, I've lived in Dubai too. It's like the extreme, like and then the UK is the other way. But if you're lucky enough to live in Queensland, it's pretty amazing all year round. You get the nice, cold, coolish winter, but it's not. He's like, shut up, kitty. We don't want to hear about your awesome Queensland. But there you go, ladies. That's menopause. And, actually quickly to finish off, talk quickly about HRT and why just taking more estrogen. Because some women will say to me, oh yeah, but I took the HRT and I took the estrogen and my symptoms has improved. And it will mask the symptoms. It doesn't actually fix things. So let's talk about what the problem is with HRT and why.
Yeah, you have to look at the long-term downstream effects of taking HRT, and there are certainly plenty of studies that show that breast tissue is enhanced, estrogen can increase fibrosis, and that's why the links with breast cancer are real and well documented. The other things as well is that estrogen what you've got to look at is the effects, and I've seen many clients that have been given HRT and fibroids and endometriosis has got worse. And this is because of the stimulatory growth effects of estrogen. Remember, estrogen is a growth hormone. Its role is to increase tissue and to proliferate tissue. Estrogen is also involved in healing. So if you cut yourself, for example, it's part of creating the new tissue that binds together. There is a need for estrogen, but often it's already excessive as well. So sometimes the HRT these days is more of the combination with a progestin. I know there are elements of the progestin that can have a beneficial effect, but there are still negative effects of the progestin that can drive the same responses of estrogen. So I think you have to look at it over the time. What are the responses to thyroid hormone? We know external source of estrogen can decrease the amount of thyroid hormone availability, increases sex hormone binding globulin. It will suppress other aspects of thyroid binding proteins. So, it's understanding what this is doing long term. Any small interventions to someone can have a beneficial effect because their system has been changed, but it can also be dysregulatory over time. So there's beneficial effects. Are they lasting the years that we need them to? And I think when you're increasing estrogen and there's an abundance of environmental estrogens, there's plenty of in our food sources, you need to be aware of what that's doing, because if it's increasing more fibrosis of breast tissue, it's stimulating some of the immune responses, the autoimmune responses. Antibodies will be increased when there's potential damage being increased by estrogens, and hence why these kind of autoimmune-like states persist. And also, what are the stimulatory effects on ovarian, uterine tissues? And it's well documented that progesterone is the ultimate endometrial protector, an ultimate ovarian protector. There's not that, you have to look at all the studies that give you a good overview of what's going on from a protective organizational perspective.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Keith. It's always great to catch up and chat to you. So hopefully for any women that are listening to this and are, going through menopause, there's some things to think about and things that you can, implement to obviously improve that, so you can feel better and then, get the weight off and keep the weight off. So thanks again, Keith, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Great. Good to see you, Kizzy. Take care. Bye.